welcome to the Church Planners Toolbox. Welcome again to our next episode here. Your host, Justin Neal, with my pastor, Pastor Josh Levesque.
Welcome back.
And today, we're continuing determining our strategy as we're launching out this church here. And as we've always said, this is a podcast about a 2-year timeline approaching your church plant's first launch and kind of going through my story as well as we're doing that, launching Detroit Baptist Church. But get to just be a part of our conversation as my pastor and I talk about the launch of the church and different areas and different sections, different topics to consider when approaching your church launch. So within determining our strategy, we have a category we'll be on the episode today, will be on setting a launch budget. So Pastor Josh, in terms of setting a launch budget, what are kind of the main categories we're looking for when we're trying to form that?
So if we're talking budgeting, we're talking about money, which is an unavoidable part of ministry, church planting. Admittedly, my least favorite thing to talk about, and I know I'm not alone there. Nobody likes talking about money. But it's necessary to accomplish the goals that we have, and so we got to talk about it, and we have to think about it. When you hear about church plants that fall apart or don't make it or aren't sustainable, sometimes a church plant, doesn't even make it to launch. Or sometimes they launch and then, don't make it through that 3, 4, 5 year mark. More often than not, it has to do with money. So it is really important to think about it strategically. So if we're setting a strategy, we need to have a strategy for how we're going to get money for the plant and then how we're going to invest it into the plant because we want to do it strategically. Having a plan for every dollar that comes in and ultimately that plan being connected to our vision. And I heard it somewhere or read it somewhere that, a budget, sometimes we just think of it as an administrative, practical document, but that a budget is actually a doctrinal document because just as much as your doctrinal statement, it reveals what you believe.
Sure, like what are you willing to spend your money on? What
exactly.
You're okay, yeah.
What do you believe in? And when it comes down to it, we want to have faith. And church planting has to be an exercise of faith.
Absolutely.
And so we want to think big and dream big and believe that God will provide. But we don't want to be presumptuous in our faith and maybe get out ahead of God or act irresponsibly in a way that is wasteful or foolish, that, makes things more difficult financially.
Well, yeah, and I think that falls under the category of being a steward of what the Lord blesses you, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have the support and you have these fundraising that you're doing, and you want to set a strategy for that because you want to use every penny. It has to be designated at a certain place. It should be thoughtfully and considerably stewarded, and that's a biblical concept that we have. Faith isn't just, I'm going out not thinking about what's going on, but I'm actually keeping track of where everything is going.
Yeah. And the ability to look down the road a little bit. Luke 14:28, Jesus says, "For which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it." Yeah. And so even in the church planting work, again, we want to have faith that it's all going to work out, but we ought to sit down first, count the cost, and make sure that we're going to have enough, not just to start, but enough to finish. And think even beyond the launch.
It's true.
In the context of it. So what we're talking about in this episode is specifically about the launch, but I think in our next episode, we'll talk a little bit beyond launch and setting some of those goals that are going to help the church plant, not just launch, but then kind of be sustained in its momentum.
Awesome. So as we're thinking about our launch budget, what are the main realms or categories, main areas that you need to budget for?
So to separate what we're talking about a launch budget here.
Yeah.
So launch is Sunday service, pre-launch really is what we're talking about, is the money that you are going to raise and then spend to get the church launched. If we use the rocket launch analogy, it takes a lot of fuel to get a rocket up off the ground, escape gravity, a lot of momentum to actually get, escape and get into orbit. After that, you have to burn a little bit of fuel to keep it going and sustaining, but there's a lot of necessary energy invested up front. So that's what we're talking about a launch budget.
Yes.
Is what is the money that you're going to spend intentionally to create the momentum that the church is going to need to get off the ground. And so we want to talk about, what are the categories of things that should be included in a launch budget, and start to think about that distinctly from then we're going to need a operational budget that's going to go on from the launch.
Sure.
But pre-launch, you're not going to have a lot of the same costs that you're going to have after. Or you're going to be in a weird transitional phase where, you're starting to add those things on. So when you're talking about a launch budget, maybe it's helpful, again, to start at the launch and work backwards. Same way we kind of did with the calendar.
Okay.
Is think about that first Sunday and everything that you're going to need to have your first service is a good place to start. So that starts obviously with somewhere to meet.
Yeah.
Right. Where are you going to meet initially? And so that's going to involve at this stage, because if we're still talking, we're over a year out. We're 2 years to a year and a half out at this point, thinking strategically ahead. You're probably not you don't necessarily have to know exactly where you're going to start, but you need to start looking at options and doing the research, meaning making the phone calls, getting ballpark numbers, starting pros and cons lists, and, start collecting all your options. And if possible, as much as you can, go to those places, walk around them, get a feel for them. Again, we talked about planning some get to know you type meetings. There's a possibility if they're rental spaces, you could test pilot some of them by holding events there, things like that. But start doing the research to find out what it's going to cost for different facilities. And, it should help you get a ballpark number of what is it going to cost. You're most likely going to be in a rental situation.
Okay.
Even if you're not, we can have the conversation between being portable versus being permanent.
Yeah.
But you could be portable or permanent, and you're still in a rental type situation. Does that make sense? Where you're paying either hourly rent. So if you're in a place like a hotel conference room, so we started hotel conference room, and we were just paying hourly per Sunday. And so there was like a weekly number that we could put on that. And that fluctuated, what room they had us in and all that fun stuff. If you're in a place like a school, you might not be paying hourly. You might be able to pay a monthly fee.
Sure.
But you could still be portable because the space that you're in on Sunday is used for other things in the week. But there's another case where, if you can move into a rented or a leased space, where there's a possibility where you're renting a space that is more permanent, but you're still paying weekly or monthly. But you just got to get ballpark numbers so you can put it into your budget for your launch. And then try to pre-raise, money for at least your first month or first couple months up front, just so you have that
I see.
prepared.
So in terms of, you're saying you're most likely when you're starting off a church plant that you're going to be renting. Is there a possibility of buying a facility when you're starting off? Sure,
and that's the dream. But I do think that there's some strategy in starting portable, in not taking on the burden of a facility right away, because it is a burden. And, being portable does free you up in some really cool ways. It almost forces you to be creative and strategic as far as how you're going to meet people It forces you to get into the community more. When you don't have a building and an office and things like that, you're kind of forced into the coffee shops and things like that. And it's good. I remember when we were portable, it was different. Like I didn't have a place to go every day. Like I had a home office that I would work in, but then, I was going out and I was, meeting people and I was doing recon and things like that in the community. And if I wanted to meet with somebody, I was either having them to my house or I was meeting them somewhere in town. That's one of the advantages. Obviously, just the financial commitment of portability is that you're not on the hook for all of the costs of building maintenance and improvement, because that can be a lot too. That's and true. It could sink a church plant if you're not ready to take on that responsibility. So obviously, if you're renting, you have a landlord. They're responsible if the AC blows up.
Yeah.
Right. You're not on the hook for it. So there's safety in it. There's also being portable up front, like being strategically portable gives you the chance to test out a location too. Because you might meet there for a couple weeks and find out, hey, like, this isn't as accessible as we thought. Maybe, most of the people we're reaching are actually coming from this side of town, and maybe we should move. And I think it's nice to have a little bit of freedom to do that up front. Or maybe you just don't like it. It's like, this is not meeting our needs. It's too small. It's too big. We don't have enough nursery space here. It lets you test the waters a little bit. So I think that liberty and that flexibility is nice for a starting church plant.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, so that's good for facilities. Checking out with that. Is there, I guess in terms of depending on what kind of area you're in, city or town, that's going to affect what the cost of your facility is.
Sure. It'll affect the cost and the opportunities too. So, choosing a meeting place is one of the most fun things in a church plant, because I've seen church planters start in all kinds of places. The popular ones are like the hotel conference rooms, because they have some advantages of they're going to have chairs, they're going to have a stage, they're probably going to have a sound. Like they have a lot of that stuff there. So there's a lot of advantage to it. They're going to have restrooms, things like that. It's already kind of built for it. But schools have always been popular for some of the same reasons. They probably have an auditorium or a gym or something that can seat a lot of people. I've seen church planters start in funeral homes. Some of the same advantages.
Are there specific kinds of places that you think are better suited for a church plant?
Well, some of those places, like they're going to have the parking. They're going to be kind of already set up for crowds to come to.
Yeah.
But again, it depends on where you're at. If you're in the city, you might have to get a little more creative.
Sure.
And you might have to meet in a storefront type property, and you might have to be portable in some way. I've seen, churches meet in like gyms or dance studios or, all kinds of places, like anywhere because a lot of places are closed on weekends. So if they're not using their building on Sunday and, they're willing to rent it out to you, and it's got to be something you can afford. And that's what counting the cost is. Like there may be this awesome place, like, oh, we'd love to meet at this, community center, but what does it cost?
Sure.
Count the cost, because it may be the better suited, but you might want to start somewhere a little more affordable, just to not spend so much of your resource on the meeting place up front till you can build up the crowd. And
sure.
No, that's the other thing about being portable is I don't think you can super accurately predict how many people you're going to have right away.
Yeah, that's true.
So having a place that's kind of flexible, like when we met at the hotel, we knew like, hey, they have small rooms and they have big rooms. So like we knew we had a little bit of space. We could move around and grow if we needed. But you might start in one space and realize real quick, we need more space. And, we can't get it here. So we're going to have to move around, till you can kind of get to a critical mass or something. And, hey, I think this size building we can do this for a while, or, this can be our home for a while. All of that is just part of that research in those places. Talk to church planters, see what they did and be creative, look around, see what the options are. I know I've talked to like missionaries that are on foreign fields, and also some church planters that start in like, Southern California places that are like, oh, we just started in the park and we met outside. I'm like, yeah, but you can't do that everywhere. Can't do that in Michigan.
Yeah, and there's a cost, like you're saying, some are more costly than others. There's also the balance too of finding a place that's a welcoming atmosphere.
Yeah.
Because you don't want your first impression of the church to be like, a dump or anything like that. There are places you have to balance out, like what can we afford, but then what are people going to be like welcomed into? What are people going to be comfortable being in?
Yeah. And that brings up another question. What about starting in your home?
Sure, true.
My dad started a church in 1995 in a very rural community, and it started in our house. We had a farmhouse, and it met in the church. It met in the house for a while, and I remember everybody that was there had very fond memories of church in the living room, and it was a cool place, and it allowed that core team to like get real close and stuff. When we started, we did our Sunday services in a hotel. But for that first year or so, when we first started doing a midweek Bible study, we did it at our home. And it was a cool thing to do it that way because, some of those early adopters, some of those early people, we got to know them very closely, spending time in our house.
For you and your dad, were they pretty crowded on some days?
I was 2 years old when the church started. So it was in the house when I was like 2 to 3. So I don't remember a lot from that. I remember going to the new building, and I remember some of that. But I've heard so many stories from that time. The main one being that there was not our bathroom for some reason was not working, and so those early services we didn't actually have a bathroom, and people had to walk down the street to the gas station.
Oh man.
To go to the bathroom. So
but people stuck with it.
Not ideal circumstances, but started and built an amazing church. So do what you have, do what you got. And I think there's some advantage to having some of those early meetings in your home, doing Bible studies in your home if you can. This is just a great personal touch to that.
Cool.
And then hey, if you want to start having an early, Sunday service in your home, and that works, but you're going to outgrow your home pretty fast, Lord willing. Right, that's the goal. You're not going to be able to do that long. But it's part of your consideration. Sooner you can get there and move there, you could start meeting. Figure out what it's going to cost, get the options, put them on a scale, and then, we'll talk the next part of setting a goal. You may, surprise yourself how much money you're able to raise and think oh, hey, we might be able to meet somewhere a little nicer. But start meeting people, making connections, and just exploring what the possibilities are. And I would say look into city-owned properties.
Okay.
That's something that, we looked into, and when we launched, it was just post-COVID, 2021. So we were on the tail of COVID. So all of the schools, city properties and stuff was all just off the table because they had just quit renting everything. But that was frustrating because the city of Dearborn has some great public spaces, some community center, theater type stuff would have been great meeting places that were kind of some of my top list things that we met at the hotel because they were the only ones that would rent to us. The schools, colleges were all off the board, but look into some of those because, those may be, you may have opportunity to get those cheap or free if you're a community member, you just have to rent them and stuff like that. So look around, find out what the facility's gonna cost. That should be, I think, the first consideration in your launch budget. Where are we gonna meet? What's it gonna cost? And then try to raise, for your launch budget, I'd say not just your first week, but your first month or first 6 months or something of meeting space.
Yeah. Have that kind of security fund in there.
Could be part of that. Because then your first Sunday, you're going to get to take up your first offering, and, hopefully you have some outside support, which we'll talk about, but, you want that money to be able to start coming in, but, it's not going to sustain you right away.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, so by what you're saying, I think one of the keys of researching your facility costs is really to give a widespread research about all the different options you have. Because it seems like by what you're saying, you have all these different options, all these different opportunities, but you're going to have to weigh and scale them out and see what's going to be best, cost benefit analysis. Yeah,
and I think we'll have an episode later on when we get a little closer to that decision of deciding which place to meet.
Okay.
And so we'll talk maybe pros and cons of location and accessibility and visibility and all these things. But at this point, the point is just find the option so that you have a scale. So hey, this is a cheap meeting place. This is an expensive meeting place. And so you can maybe set your target somewhere in the middle.
I see.
This is an affordable thing for us just to have numbers. I remember like when we first started thinking about it, I didn't even have categories. And again, different communities are going to have different categories.
Sure. True.
Completely. So just start getting ballparks on that. So you can set a budget.
Cool. Awesome. So then there's facility. I think another part of setting your launch budget is going to be on outreach costs. What are the type of items involved in your outreach?
Outreach, think everything you're going to do to reach people and let people know about your launch. Everything you're going to do to get people to that place. So this is the real like rocket fuel that you're pouring into this to really light it up and really get some momentum. So we're going to talk about setting goals as far as what types of outreach you're going to do, how ambitious your outreach is going to be, how wide you're going to try to cast the net, and what that's going to cost. So again, for the budget, if you're going to set, all this is going to end up hopefully being able to set a singular goal. Like we need to raise this much money to launch the church. So again, ballpark numbers.
Sure.
But start looking into, hey, if we want to print 20,000 John and Romans, what's that going to cost? Mm-hmm. If we want to do a door-to-door mailing for this entire zip code, what's that going to cost? If we want to, do Facebook advertising for 6 months leading up, what's that going to cost? Or how much do we want to put into it? Things like that. So just what are you going to do to let people know about it? How much money are you going to pour into that?
Yeah. So you talked about John Romans, so like door-to-door handouts. There's mailing, Facebook ads. Are there any other types of outreach that
I'll give you just the ballparks that we put on this is our launch fund budget. And we had $5,000 for door hangers. I don't remember how many door hangers that was, but we put 5,000 for door hangers. For John and Romans, we had a ministry cover the cost of the John and Romans, which was great, but we still had to raise money to have custom covers, and then we raised money to put inserts inside of them that were like launching things. So we still had a category for it. But let's see, we had, through 3,600 for the covers and the inserts. We had a category for the door hanger bags, $1,500 for the bags to put them all in.
Okay.
Hang on the door. So like thinking just, practically, door hanger bags, John and Romans, inserts, actual door hangers. And then we had a category for just $1,000 online advertising. Online advertising is one of the things that like you get the more out of it, the more you put into it. It's just, so whatever you can put in your budget for it, it's going to be some of the best return on your investment, I'd say.
So you're saying Facebook advertising in particular, like they can give you a really good return.
You've got to do it. Yeah, you've got to do it. So that category is, it's not like, because with door hangers, it's pretty set. It's like, okay, we want to do, 30,000 homes. We calculate, we've got 30,000 homes in our, city that we want to try to cover all of them. That's a pretty set thing. So you're like, okay, what does it cost to get 40,000 door hangers or 40,000 door hanger bags or something?
Yeah.
But with Facebook, it's just more like you go in there. If you've never played with Facebook ads, start playing with it, because you'll see like the more money you put in, the more eyeballs they can guarantee you. And you can, limit it to a certain mileage from a location, and things like that. So you should do all of it. You should try to do a little bit of all of it. But start putting again, ballpark numbers together so that you can have a launch budget, so you can have a whole goal. But your meeting place should be in there. Your outreach costs should be in there. And consider the cost of, now we're going to talk about how to recruit. Hopefully you can recruit churches to come in and help you with that.
Sure.
But consider some of the cost in hosting people, like not just having the materials, but if you're going to have groups coming in and you want to have every week have, coolers with bottled water, Gatorades, snacks. Not that you're going to have to, churches are pretty good about not being a burden on the church planter. Like a lot of them will bring that stuff themselves, but just consider that as part of your cost for outreach is entertaining and hosting volunteers.
Sure.
Well,
no, that's good. So yeah, we've got facility, outreach. There's another topic here to consider for our launch budget: equipment. How important is it to have good equipment starting out in your church plant?
This is the other big part of that launch fund is, raise money to buy the equipment that you're going to need to launch, but then that you're going to then use to continue your services on. So think through everything you need to run a service, and that's going to depend somewhat on where you launch. But like we were launching at a hotel that had a sound system, but we still raised the money and bought our own sound system because again, we didn't know for sure that we were going to stay in the hotel or the hotel could have closed on us or whatever. We didn't want to be totally reliant on that. So we raised the money and bought our own, and it was great because then, as we had to move to different places and we've used that to do outdoor services, and it made us a lot more flexible. And we've used all that stuff that we purchased initially. So think through it. I'll say one category to consider that's kind of between advertising and equipment is signage.
Okay.
This is another thing that should be part of your launch budget is getting signage for your church plant. Especially if you're meeting in a temporary portable type location, you need lots of signs to help people know where you are, find you, know where to go to the entrance, know where to park. Once you get an idea of where you're going to be meeting, you can get a little more specific, but it doesn't hurt to just have ahead of time, just getting some big banners with your church name on it, getting sidewalk signs, getting the teardrop flag banners, all that stuff, and just get it generic, just with your church branding on it, because you'll use it for launch. You'll use it for years. We're still using some of the signage that we bought when we were portable. Even when we got a building, some of that signage, just like our nursery sign, it was the one that we put up in front of our nursery when we were portable. When we got a building, we slapped it on our nursery door. It's still there. That just says, drop your kids off here, because we made it generic enough that it's still useful to us. So think signage. That's definitely something to raise money for because it's not cheap. Consider getting like a tent, maybe a custom branded tent. You'll use it for outreach. You'll use it for hosting groups. You'll use it for, going to parks, being part of community events. A tent is an awesome thing to have. Something you can raise money for. All that goes under signage, which is kind of advertising, outreach, kind of equipment. It's its own category, but part of the launch budget. And so then when it comes to equipment, again, consider your location. Sometimes that location means you're going to have to raise money for chairs. And I've seen guys, hey, we're launching, we're meeting at this place, but we have to buy all the chairs. Then if that's a big cost, then put it in your launch budget. Try to raise the money up front so that you have it day one. Obviously, some of the things I think everybody needs to consider is your stage and sound.
Sure.
You need a pulpit, you need a microphone, you need some speakers, you need a soundboard.
In terms of having that starting off equipment, how important is it to have that on like your first Sunday? Because there might be a stage where you kind of develop into that, but there's also the balance of it's good to have a really good first launch Sunday. So in terms of having good equipment, is it really important to just have as best equipment as you can for that first Sunday?
I think it's worth investing in.
Yeah.
Because again, you're not just doing one Sunday, like you're committing to do 100 Sundays, right? Think about your first 100 Sundays. What am I going to need? I'm going to need something that I can trust, that I know how to use. There's a temptation to maybe just like get something cheap that's going to get you by. But think a little further down the road, get something that's going to last, get something that's going to hold up to possibly being moved around and packed up. And, it's worth getting quality stuff, and it's never going to be easier to raise money than pre-launch.
Yeah, sure, exactly.
That's going to be your best opportunity to raise the money that you need. So think about what you want. Think about what you're going to need. You don't need to overspend. We don't need the Cadillac of, everything. So be reasonable, be equitable, but get things that are going to work and things that are going to last.
Yeah, just reliable.
Yeah, and like I said with the meeting place, when you have your launch Sunday, it shouldn't be your first Sunday. So same deal. It shouldn't be the first time you're using your soundboard. You should practice with it and get to know it a little bit. So try to get it ahead of time as well, which is why we're thinking about this 2 years out. Know what we want, how much it's going to cost, so we can raise the money. And as soon as there's money, let's buy it and let's start using it. Let's start getting used to it. All those things. So we knew that we were going to be portable pretty early on. Like we kind of counted the cost of like, hey, there's no way we're going to be able to buy a building. Like, and not that we necessarily would want to right away either. So we're going to start portable. And so we had narrowed it down to like a couple different hotels options. So we didn't quite know which one, but we knew we were going to be portable. So like, let's start thinking about portable equipment. So our big investment was into a complete portable church kit.
Yeah. That thing looks awesome.
And it was really nice. And, we were just, committed that, hey, we're going to be in this for the long haul. We could be portable for our lives. And I've seen guys, especially in urban church plants, be portable for years and years. So we went into it with that mindset. And so we invested a lot in a portable church kit that included a trailer. We had to buy a trailer. And then we went with a company called Portable Church Industries that's actually based here in Michigan. But I know they build kits for church planters all over the country. And, we kind of went with one of their smaller kits. They do like some crazy big ones. They're like multiple trailers and stuff. But
wow,
we specifically wanted a one trailer and a small trailer. That was pretty much just like our stage equipment, our nursery equipment, our hospitality equipment. So we could set up our own, meeting stuff. And that included a lot of our sound and stuff. But that was a big investment for us.
But you'd say that was a worthy investment.
Yeah, for sure. Because then even after we got a building, a lot of that equipment was the stuff that we now use in our building. We even bought like one of the things to consider now is like cameras. You're gonna need cameras to capture. You're gonna want to capture these early days anyways, like recording, but then thinking about live streaming and how we're gonna do all that kind of stuff. So think through all your tech, but then think through your nurseries. Portable nurseries are difficult, but think through having toys and furniture and stuff that is able to, pack up and move and all those things. That was all part of it, was that kind of equipment. And then think specialty equipment like a pulpit. We did buy our own pulpit up front and moved it around with our kit. We could have gotten one from the hotel, but we just wanted to have our own for consistency.
Sure.
And we wanted to get songbooks. That was important to us to have hymnals. That's a piece of equipment that you're going to need up front. They're not cheap.
So you got that for your first Sunday?
Yeah.
Hymn books?
Yep.
Okay.
We had hymn books, which being portable meant we needed to have bins and things to haul the songbooks. But we wanted to have songbooks. And so we did that. But we also wanted to have a projector and a screen. So that was part of our launch kit. On our stage, we wanted to have music stands and, just some of that stuff that we owned. One of the things you might not think through equipment-wise is like, how are you going to take an offering? Are you going to pass a plate? Do you need offering plates? Are you just going to have collection boxes? Those are all things to invest in up front. And again, some of those things that we got then we're still using now in different ways to collect offerings. How are you going to baptize people?
That's true, yeah.
Something to think through. We were in a hotel, so our first thought was, we'll just use the hotel pool. They shut us down on that pretty quick, actually. Didn't let us do that. So we ended up having to, we had put Portable Baptistry in our launch fund.
Okay.
And so we actually had the money to buy a inflatable pool.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, we're still baptizing that pool 5 years later. So let's think it through, put it on there. It's a bit of a wish list. You might not raise all the money to get it all, but start with the most important things and
sure.
Put it out there, I've found that, like, again, this is your best opportunity to raise money because you're going to be naturally in front of a lot of churches, and churches like to invest in these things. They like to work. I mean, they want to help church planters, but some of them like to help in specific ways. So a church, I've found different churches have different things that they're drawn to. Like some churches, are like, hey, we want to help you get your first batch of hymn books. And that's just what they do for every church planter or missionary. Or like, hey, we want to get you your keyboard. We want to get you your baptistry. We want to get you your Lord's Supper set. Some churches like doing, they want to give to something tangible that their people can rally around. And that, then you kind of have that thing of like, hey, this was from them. And so a launch budget should kind of be built, I think, like a wish list.
Okay.
Or, a wish list or a shopping list of sorts that then people could give to directly.
Yeah, so you're saying listing off specific items that you are budgeting for.
Yeah.
And then you would present your ministry in that way so people can give to those particular things.
And it doesn't have to be like specifically like, soundboard, Allen and Heath, this and that. Like, we want this specific make and model. It can just be soundboard, microphones, line items, like that. But you've done the research that you're not just guessing on these numbers. It's actually enough to afford what you want to get.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's what I mean by launch budget is count the cost. What is it going to take to actually have a church service, to have a place to meet, have all the equipment necessary to actually have a service, and then the money that it's going to take to advertise it, get people there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things you said is a real key here. You mentioned kind of take your launch service and work backward. So you take yourself to that first Sunday and think to yourself, okay, what am I going to need on that first Sunday, and in such a way to carry forward, but you're fast forwarding yourself to that point so that you can prepare for everything that you need for that Sunday, and then just work backward, like what kind of equipment, what the facility, what kind of outreach I'm going to need to get that done. You put yourself into that first Sunday so that you can organize and you can lay out everything you're going to need for your launch Sunday.
Yeah. And so what's a reasonable number for it? Because I remember having that fear of like, man, am I going to look bad asking for so much? Or, but once you start actually making the list and people can, like so our number that we came up with for our launch fund was $50,000. We ended up actually over raising that a little bit. I mean, raising more than $50,000. But once you can break it down and show people like what that is, nobody bats an eye because, pastors know how expensive these things are, and it doesn't look like you're greedy or anything. If you can explain exactly what it is you want it for and what you're going to do with it. And so that was the number we landed at. But again, depending on what you need, it might be more, it might be less. If you have to buy chairs, if you have to buy something specific to make your meeting place, maybe it's like, oh, we have this opportunity to meet at this place, but there's no stage. We have to build a stage, or we have to, build out, like we have to put a bathroom into this place before we can meet there. I've seen church planners run into that. Like, this is the perfect place, but we got to put bathrooms in. And so what does that cost? All that should be pre-considered and, put into your launch budget. So it might be more than that, might be less than that. But break it down. Just start a list, start adding it up, try to come up with a nice round number that can be a goal. And then as you're going around, even people that aren't going to take you on for monthly support might be willing to contribute to your launch fund one time, might be willing to just purchase a specific thing off your launch fund for you. But I also found that as we went around and, when we did get love offerings, things like that, that all went into launch fund, it all went towards that. So we could be very clear with people like, hey, if you give to us pre-launch, this is what this is going towards. And this is just kind of how we approached it, for our monthly support. Because when you're doing deputation, some churches will take you on right away. Yeah. Some churches will wait till you launch to take you on. Mm-hmm. Some churches just have to wait like a cycle of business meetings or whatever. So the staggering of when support starts is different all the time. But all of our monthly support that came in pre-launch, we put into launch fund.
Yeah, that's great.
Which kind of helped us hit that goal. And then after that, it kind of went more into an operational budget type of spending. Mm-hmm. But, we were able to kind of have our salary and things already kind of paid for in that way, so that the monthly support that came in right away could go towards it. But everybody's in different situations, so you might not be able to do that. But I think that it's helpful to have a launch budget and organize it in such a way that people can give towards it. And then you never know, some of these early people that you meet in the community that want to be part of your church, some of your launch team, some of these people might want to invest in the work. You might have family or friends who they want to be part of what you're doing. They believe in you, and they want to be part of what you're doing. This is just a tangible way to let them do that. Like, hey, if you want to be part of our church plant, this is our wish list.
Yeah.
And put it out there in a way that, if somebody wants to, chip in $100, they can chip in $100 towards some gospel tracts or something. Or if, they want to put $5,000, like, hey, you can purchase all of our door hangers that are going to go for outreach. It helps give people something to give towards.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is a great part of determining your strategy, setting up your launch budget, because this is where a lot of what you're going to be putting into your launch is really tangible. You're really saying what are things going to cost. And so, money is a weird thing to talk about sometimes, but it's a good time to just see some of these things be brought into reality as you're forming this budget. So it's exciting. It's a really good thing. And with all this to say, I think the biggest takeaway we can take from today is, really plan it out. Really plan it out. Get your details in order, and use that so that people can clearly understand what you're going to be spending all of your money on. Because all these supporting churches are trusting you to be able to manage this money well that you're contributing for them.
Yeah.
It's different than being paid for a job, because you're doing the work and they're paying you for the work you're doing. So it's up to you however you want to spend that money. But these people are donating for your cause so that you can do this thing. So it's in a certain way, it's not completely your money. It's someone else's money that they're giving to you, trusting that you're going to use that well. And what a privilege and opportunity and an honor it is for a church planner going out to be able to use that and to start and birth a new church into your area.
Yeah. And again, it's going to be different in different circumstances. You know, maybe for you, raising $10,000 is maybe you don't have enough time or something. So, but maybe the place you're meeting, you don't need as much starting equipment. Maybe that doesn't need to be part of your budget.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, borrow or, get used equipment from churches. Sometimes they're willing to donate these things. You can save a lot. So, it's just an ambition. It's just something to shoot at and kind of help give you a plan.
Awesome. Well, Pastor Josh, thank you for all of your thoughts on this, on setting your launch budget. Next episode, we're going to be talking about setting your launch goals, which is also super exciting as well. So stay in tune, keep watch for our next episode, and we will look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you again for attending the Church Planners Toolbox. We'll see you next time.